for tonight, we read an Anti-Sexism Manifesto, which has the great subtitle, The Rights of Women and the Responsibilities of Socialist Men. This was written by Sandra Bloodworth, a veteran revolutionary socialist from Socialist Alternative Australia. And it's required reading for that group for all new members. All right, so Bloodworth starts off by talking about the personal and the political, and says that the separation of private and public life, or of personal and political life, is artificial. Everything is permeated by politics. And then she moves on to talk about the family, and says gender oppression and stereotypes. Gender stereotypes are maintained and reproduced by the ideology and the experience of the family. The gender roles associated with the capitalist family, a strong, aggressive, breadwinning male, and a nurturing, passive, caregiving female, pervade all of society through the education system, the mass media, entertainment, and so on. Objective social conditions, such as unequal wages and job prospects that are beyond our control, prevent heterosexual couples from fully redressing inequality, even when they want to. Women experience inequality with their partners in the family and at work. They both suffer sexual oppression and exploitation. Women experience inequality with their partners in the family and at work. They suffer both sexual oppression and exploitation as workers. The two interact and reinforce each other. By contrast, working class men suffer exploitation, but not gender oppression. And by the way, this text doesn't address transgender and gender non-conforming people whatsoever. There's no date attached to the PDF, so I don't know when, but I'm assuming that's why, because it was more than several years ago, basically. The family, or a steady monogamous relationship, is seen as and sought after as a haven from the pressures of society. But it often becomes a site of frustration, disappointment, and oppression, added oppression. The use of women's bodies as sex objects reinforces old ideas of women's responsibility to satisfy men's needs. Bloodworth says, quote, "It is an illusion deliberately fostered by those who run capitalism that we have control over our personal lives and can act purely as individuals." So there's some tension here. She's getting into basically this dichotomy or tension and dialectical relationship between the objective conditions and subjective conditions. Objective conditions or objective factors, including like the external world, the social structure that's imposed upon us by the ruling class, basically material conditions, whereas subjective factors include our consciousness, our activity, our own will, including our struggle against the ruling order. And the objective and the subjective are interdependent. One influences the other. But to return to kind of like what we're talking about, Bloodworth says heterosexual couples enter relationships on an unequal basis. That cannot be changed while capitalism exists. But we are not mere victims of the structures we live under. Our behavior is not pre-programmed and preordained. Armed with a clear political understanding of the influence of the horrible ideas of capitalism and the structures that underpin and constantly renew them, we can change. Socialists do not passively accept that workers will always submit to their boss's authority or that they will inevitably adopt racist or otherwise backward and backward and divisive ideas. We fight those ideas vigorously wherever we can. And so it is with sexism. And so I was reminded of a great quote from Marx, who said, men make their own history. Oh, men, you know, he wrote even longer ago, right? So, yeah, people make their own history, but they do not make it just as they please. They do not make it under circumstances chosen by themselves, but under circumstances directly encountered, given, and transmitted from the past. And then the money part, the tradition of all the dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brain of the living. Jesus, so macabre. And on point. So we must do what we can to escape bourgeois influence, to group together with other would-be escapees, and to fight for the overthrow of bourgeois rule. Ultimately, as Marxists, we believe the mode of production must be forcibly overturned in order to end the production and reproduction of oppressive systems and ideas. Marx famously also said that a revolution was necessary, not only because it was the only way for the old order to be changed, but because, quote, the class overthrowing it, the old order, can only in a revolution succeed in ridding itself of all the muck of ages and become fitted to found society anew. So fighting sexism and its ugly relatives, homophobia and transmisogyny, is not about prefiguring a future gender-liberated society. We're not just trying to set some example or just start living as free people now. It's about doing what's required to build a fighting force to usher in that society. We have to be able to work with each other and respect each other and build multi-gendered, multiracial, multinational, ultimately, organizations that can fight together. A revolutionary organization should be a crucible for working out our problems as objects of bourgeois ideology. In other words, we are subjected to it, so we're the objects of that ideology, and as subjects of revolutionary transformation. In other words, we're the actors that are going to transform this world. We have to be gentle and generous with each other, while also being firm and steadfast in our pursuit of liberation from the backwardness we're immersed in. Then Bloodworth turns to a section called consciousness raising. She says, men are socialized to dominate social situations and believe that their ideas, desires, and needs are paramount. Men are listened to more attentively, taken more seriously, and guide conversations more often. Women, on the other hand, are socialized to defer to those around them and to be more sensitive to others' needs and demands. For socialist men to have relationships with women that are not blatantly sexist, they must integrate an understanding of structural social misogyny. They must recognize how this socialization affects their behavior and that of women and other genders. They must consciously struggle to recognize and eliminate their own sexism. In socialist organizations, women who take leadership roles, who assert themselves, who make the effort to study the politics and take responsibility for winning arguments about what needs to be done, are often met with a sexist response. They get called bossy, or like a teacher, is what Bloodworth says, as if teachers were bad. But the bossiness, yes. And it's a way of deflecting from an actual political argument and engaging with their political arguments. we have formal structures for our meetings where everyone is expected to listen in silence, to wait their turn, etc. For instance, we use stack, we use progressive stack, we have timed comments that can help an overly talkative man like myself. But those structures only make temporary space for participation and respect. If that respect doesn't run deep, the formal structures will feel like a sham. Then Bloodworth moves on to talk about sexism in personal life. She says men shouldn't talk about women as if they are sex objects. In one of the, I don't know, slightly funnier, I don't mean to make light of any of this stuff, but comments, she says men should not drape themselves around a woman that they're in a relationship with. That signals that she is his appendage. I get it. I don't mean to, again, don't mean to make light of it. Just it seemed like it stuck out in the text. Men should avoid, she says, men should avoid controlling behavior. They should not deny women their autonomy, their independence, and their own political views. She talks about consent. No means no. And beyond that, men need to recognize that women are likely to feel pressured into going along with what a man does and wants. It is only when a man acknowledges a woman's rights, her autonomy as a person, and his own dominant position in relation to her, and acts accordingly, that a woman can be truly free to give consent. Then she talks about date rape, and I'm putting air quotes around it because I'm not a fan of that term. I understand its meaning, but you know, it sometimes is used to soften the fact that we're talking about rape. So that's kind of my objection. Bloodworth says, often non-violent on the surface, and sometimes the result of mixed messages, not listening, wishful thinking, and or diminished capacity on the part of one or both parties. Date rape is one of the most misunderstood and controversial of sex crimes. And she goes on to say, if a woman is intoxicated, she cannot consent to sex. That's rape. On the topic of orgasm, Bloodworth says it is men's behavior and women's lack of confidence to demand satisfaction from men that leads to the gross disparity in sexual pleasure. And she cites some statistics about that. Basically, men can't be bothered to find the clit. And what the fuck? Again, this is very focused on heterosexual sex and cisgendered people, but so excuse that, please. Bloodworth goes on to say that safe sex and contraception is a social responsibility, but there's nothing liberatory or revolutionary about taking risks with your own and your partner's lives. And then she goes on to talk about political spaces more explicitly. She says that men in particular should not treat political spaces as pickup joints. If a man propositions a woman who comes to a meeting or an action, it's a clear signal that he is not relating to her as a political actor, as someone with a contribution to make to the struggle or the organization, but as a sex object or potential date. It makes the woman feel uncomfortable with the man, as well as with our events and our organization. Bloodworth says she is likely to assume our group tolerates sexist behavior, and she may reject our organization or honestly activism in general, just out of hand. And we can't allow that. This reminds me of the experience of the Combahee River Collective. The Combahee River Collective was an important group of Black, mostly lesbian, Marxist feminists from the 70s, early 70s, mid 70s. Their experience and disillusionment with the Black Panthers and the civil rights movement, as well as the wider left dominated by white men, led them to organize independently of both and to develop a politics that was explicitly anti-sexist, unlike what they encountered in the Black liberation movement, and explicitly anti-racist, unlike what they encountered in the wider left at the time. So to conclude, kind of on the topic of the personal is political, like Socialist Alternative, the Denver Communists don't have nor want to have quote unquote bedroom police. We also don't have rules against fraternization, which is a weird term because it seems like it implies that it's strictly between men, right? Frat, but you know how it's used. So nevertheless, a failure to treat the issues that we've covered here seriously and to integrate them into our political views can be nothing but destructive. It could undermine the confidence of women comrades and eat at the heart of our organization's integrity. No one is allowed to be in a frat. If you're in the Denver Communists, those are fucking rape clubs. Anyway, sorry, I was looking at the chat. Serious offenses should be referred to our coordinating committee. The predominant culture of a political organization can help give women the confidence to stand up to men and to take control of their lives as far as possible. If women know they will be supported by other members, they are more likely to rebuff sexist behavior. A strong anti-sexist organizational culture can exercise some discipline over men's behavior and attitudes. These issues are not trivial or peripheral, but central to the main political work, propaganda, and life of a revolutionary organization. We need to recruit and develop women, trans, and non-binary members, as well as members from all specially oppressed groups. This requires creating a space where every member and contact is treated with respect, support, and solidarity. Moreover, a space where we treat each other as political subjects struggling for our collective liberation. No socialism without gender liberation, no gender liberation without socialism. Thank you.